Tonight we continue our series of pre-election interviews with a candidate for state representative in the 11th Suffolk District. The district includes parts of Jamaica Plain, Roxbury, Rosendale, and Grove Hall. Our guest is the incumbent seeking her 11th term in the Democratic primary on September 4th. We'd like to welcome Representative Liz Malia. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
It's seldom I get to ask somebody what it's like to run for an 11th term, but is there anything you can think of that makes you feel you're glad that you're still doing this as a state rep?
There are good days and bad, but I'm really happy that I feel like I've been in the legislature long enough to sort of learn building relationships with people, starting to learn about how to influence policy, and particularly around areas around the opioid epidemic in the last few years. And I think we're doing some really crucial, astonishing work right now. And there's a lot more to do, and I want to stay part of that.
I certainly saw you a few months back when they opened the expanded treatment facility at the D-11th Center. Yeah. What's the backstory? What's your role in doing that?
Well, aside from the fact that D-11th has been, one of the community health centers that's really central to my district, not just Jamaica Plain, but parts of Roxbury and Dorchester. They've been there doing detox and substance use treatment for years. They were one of the site of one of the first programs like that targeted towards African American and people of color, African American community and the people of color and language. Again, they're continuing to do some of the work that gets overlooked and that is not accessible anywhere near enough at this point in time. I mean, just the way we're trying to restructure some of the service availability for substance use is to build out the length of time that people get treatment. There's not enough beds, there's not enough programming. The DMIC just rebuilt and built out their recovery program, and these are essential services for a lot of people, and they save lives.
We've recently been profiling the opioid crisis as a white people's problem, but more recently we have this very disturbing trend that there's this sharp disparity in the fatality rate.
Yes.
It hits the black community really hard. What should be done about that?
Well, one of the things that I think, first of all, is the awareness has to be ingrained in people. I do a lot of work with a number of programs, but particularly a group called Project Right in Grove Hall. And there are a number of individuals that do the kind of outreach work with young people that needs to happen, but also, with older populations. I mean, where substance use hasn't been targeted before and there haven't been a lot of accessible resources, you need to have those conversations with people. There's a lot of shame and a lot of stigma attached to these, to these issues. I mean, I was a person in recovery. I can say that it was probably harder for me to come out as someone who was in recovery than it was as a gay, lesbian, as LGBT person. And we don't have a lot of accessible programming. And we just have to do that. If we have to build it in communities where people will welcome us, and then we have to be able to provide those services, but they have to be culturally competent too. And again, that's one of the things that's been missing. There's a couple of programs, Casa Esperanza in Dudley, that my old friend Rick Quiroga helped get started and is doing an incredible job with Spanish language speakers. And it's not just the initial recovery, but also supporting people so that they can get back into the real world, deal with their family issues, deal with their own personal issues, deal with their employment issues, and maintain their recovery. And it's one of the toughest things to do, I think.
One issue that's not entirely related is a plan for a supportive housing on the Shattuck Hospital campus, because part of that is going to be vacated. Feelings are sharply mixed about that in the neighborhood. How do you feel about it? It's in the district, right?
Well, absolutely. I think, again, the discussions have been somewhat convoluted in terms of where the timing has the way the timing has come up. The discussion has been had for a while that, some of us have known that Shattuck itself, the hospital, is old, it's creaky, they have, high need patients there. They really need to look at something, the Department of Public Health really needed to look at what we were going to do for the future. And, the reality is that land, it by law has to be used for public health treatment, public health services. And, it's pretty natural, I think, that people who live in an area want to know what's going on. They haven't seen a real description yet of what might happen there. And that's partly because there's still a lot of planning happening. And the state's doing a better job. DCAM's doing a better job now of doing some outreach and having conversations with people. And I think we'll do well. Health and Human Services Secretary Mary Lou Sutters she's an amazing administrator. I think partly because of her years in social work, but I think she has the capacity to really build more of a bridge. And again, problems, the potential for moving the hospital off seem very good, but there are still programs there. The shelter is still there. Some of the 12-step programs and the recovery programs are still on site and on campus. We need to do, of anything, that's the population that needs more and more focus on our part. And again, the rising fatality rates in terms of people of color, it's because we don't have the bridges. We don't have the network established. And I think we're doing, on the state and on the city level, we're doing a much better job, but we have a lot more to do.
This has been on news, and we're talking with Liz Malia, candidate for re-election as state representative in the 11th Suffolk District. Representative, you worked on criminal justice reform. There was a conglomerate of things that was approved this past year, and you had a couple of pieces that were part of that. Can you tell us about that? Basically, one of the things that I've been focusing on throughout, especially the last few years, I've looked at quarry reform. I mean, my idea has been, our prisons have become ad hoc last resort, the destination of last resort for a lot of people with mental health issues. A lot of those folks with serious mental health issues that aren't treated end up in our prison system, our criminal justice system. And, in some ways we spend an incredible amount of money and get very little outcome in terms of what's valuable. So a lot of people have really started looking at, instead of the punitive angle of criminal justice, let's talk about how do we do rehab, how do we reach out to those folks. The majority of the people who are in prison today are going to be coming back to their own neighborhoods and their own communities. And if you are someone who, the early days to ban the quarry on your employment box, that was one of the first pieces we did, and then we did a few years ago. We basically managed to change the Registry of Motor Vehicles law so that the people who had been involved in a drug issue who were incarcerated no longer had to face losing their license automatically and then having to pay a fee, and $200 fee to get their licenses back, and then struggle to pay their other debts. It made it almost impossible for a lot of folks to get employment. And again, they're looking for employment, house painting, food service, a lot of those jobs. If you don't have access to transportation, you can't pay any of your debts. And it made a big difference when the Registry of Motor Vehicles started, when we were able to implement that, abolishing that fine. This year, folks from the Greater Boston Legal Services approached us and said the issues they saw for clients coming into Greater Boston Legal Services were people who basically, the length of your quarry sentence, whether or not you could get things sealed. There were a number of very specific issues that we said, let's try to do this. And we were fortunate to be able to incorporate it into the criminal justice package, which is one of the most comprehensive things I think we've done in a long, long time. And, it's changing people's lives, and it's putting the focus on how do we rehabilitate people, how do we get them back to work, back to their families,
and stop spending money, endless amounts of money on, the revolving door. Really, we weren't doing, for all the good things that have happened in Massachusetts, we've done very little historically to address the mental health, substance use issues that people come to jail with. And, in order to really change the outcome, we're going to have to change how we address those things.
Before you were elected the first time, you were an aide to John McDonough, one of the great visionaries in healthcare reform. Decades later, there are all these challenges running for state reps saying we need Medicare for all. Is it time for a new paradigm, or is that just a pie in the sky?
I totally understand and support the fact that we need to be doing more in terms of affordability for healthcare. I think the ACA, the legislative national work that's been done, the work that's been done in Massachusetts is incredible. I think we have the highest percentage of people who are covered by some form of insurance of any state in the country. But the long-term issue is, how are we going to pay to afford, how are we going to be able to afford paying for basic health care for everyone? Whether it's the government or some other format. Right now we're stuck with the formula we've got. The insurers have a lot have a lot of control. This is still a work in progress. And I think what's crucial is maintaining the types of protections we've got to keep Massachusetts, in the front line, and then continue these discussions about where the money's going to come from. Vermont tried universal single payer. They didn't have the money. And California's tried it, and other areas have tried it. Our system in the U.S. started on a totally different set of principles than we've seen happen in some of the European countries. And, again, it's going to take a long time to just fight this out. And it's going to be with us for years to come.
Your district includes part of Rosendale around Washington Street, southwest of Forest Hill Station. There was an experiment with a dedicated bus lane to speed up the service and maybe reduce congestion. Yep. How did you think that worked out?
I think so. From everything I've heard so far, including contact with constituents who use it, it's worked very well. Again, and I think it's one of the areas we're going to start seeing some more transportation planning happening in different areas. But the construction that went along with the takedown of the Casey overpass was a really long, torturous affair for everybody. And when the idea of the dedicated bus lanes came in, it really lifted a tremendous amount of pressure off that one, roadway. And I'm hearing that people are very pleased with it.
And finally, we've touched on this before, maybe. One thing you do every summer on more than one occasion is you get out in the district for hot dog nights. Explain to our viewers what that means and why you keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, it's very hard to find an environment where you can connect with people on a direct level. And I think that's one of the most important parts of the job that I have, is to have some sense of what people's needs are and what their issues are. We've never had enough youth services in Boston. BCYF has done some really good work, but there's not enough, and there's not enough girls and boys clubs. And out of school and after school is where young people, I believe, really start to build some sense of confidence and begin to carry over into the classroom, so that summer isn't just a wasted block of time, and sometimes a really dangerous block of time for some kids. Without connections, we lose a lot of kids, just figuratively or literally. And having a place for people in community to get together and connect, and to just spend some time with kids. And what we've done is worked very closely with the community policing concept that's come out of in our new commissioner. I think will be very, very helpful with. We have community service officers from our both precincts that I do hot dog nights in, that come every week. They get to know the kids. They do some activities with them, and there's a real exchange of information, but also relationships. And young people that I've known, some of the families that I've known over the years, and it's been quite a few, who were not necessarily the type that you would think would build relationships, are connecting, They're talking to the public safety public safety officers. It's another chance to do skill building, reading, artwork, etc. The BPL has done some good work. Read Boston has done some good work, and we just basically are there on a consistent basis. And providing it doesn't rain too hard, it's really you just watch kids grow up, and then build relationships with them, and ask them about school, how you doing, where are you, what are you interested in, and it's sort of knitting the fabric, you know, of a quilt. As time goes on, I think the fabric of that support system has gotten stronger and stronger, and you know, it sounds like a very simple thing, but I think it's long term has a lot of positive effects for a lot of people.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Candidate for re-election, State Representative Liz Malia. We'll have more news in just a moment.